Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sean Williams. I'm the Vice President of Operations for Ravago Americas. I'd like to welcome all of you to the latest installment of Entec Polymers live webinar sessions. In response to the COVID-19 pandemic, Entec created this webinar series to fill a vacuum of communication with our valued suppliers and customers that were the result of restrictions on travel and in-person meetings. The participation in these webinars has been extremely good, and we're excited to continue with the kind of active engagement that these webinars have fostered, even as things steadily get back to normal. In today's session, we'll discuss the many challenges we're facing with persistent disruption that we've all experienced in the supply chain for everything from consumer and industrial products to cars and trucks and construction materials. Very little has been spared. There's been no shortage of media coverage on the current state of global and even regional supply chain issues, and while we're certainly planning to cover the many challenges that we're all facing in our presentation today, the main objective of today's webinar is to share some ideas that we have to help our suppliers and customers, and frankly everyone in between, to mutually deal with those challenges and possibly even turn them into opportunities. Our format today will be a live presentation from me and a couple of my colleagues with a combined experience of over 50 years in supply chain and logistics. And we're also fortunate to have experts from several of our valued third-party logistics providers who we feel can add some unique perspective and suggestions on how we can confront the issues most of us are experiencing today. There will be time for a Q&A at the end of the session, but you can submit your questions at any time using the chat box to the upper right of your screen. We'll allow time at the end to read off as many questions as we can and provide time for answers. And lastly, you'll receive a copy of today's presentation via email following the webinar. Let's get started with some brief introductions and an overview of Entec Polymers. As mentioned in the opening, I'm Sean Williams, and I've been with Entec and the Ravago Group for 24 years. My responsibilities within the organization have ranged from accounting, finance, information technology, and human resources. Been responsible for operations for 15 years, and these days I spend most of my time focused on supply chain and logistics. Jay Pickett manages the domestic logistics team for Ravago Americas, which includes Entec and its sister companies. Jay and his team oversee all the over-the-road and rail shipments. Jay's been with Ravago for 7 years in logistics and supply chain management functions with different organizations for 20 years overall. Alex Barrett is our procurement and capacity manager for ocean freight for Ravago Americas. Alex worked for MSC for 18 years prior to joining Ravago 4 years ago, mostly as the trade manager for Latin America. In total, the Ravago Group has over 150,000 road and rail shipments and over 60,000 ocean shipments between exports and imports every year. Our team manages all of that activity centrally out of our headquarters in Orlando, Florida, and I'm fortunate to have Jay and Alex on my team. Joining us from outside of Ravago, Andrew Greer is a worldwide account manager for FedEx, living in Gainesville, Florida. In his 24 years with FedEx, Andrew has held several roles in both sales and operations, giving him a unique perspective in the transportation industry. FedEx handles the majority of Entec's less than truckload freight. Matt Johnson joined Arrive Logistics in 2016. As a business development manager at Arrive, Matt's responsible for sales strategy and operational efficiencies. Matt currently resides in Austin, Texas, where he and his team manage some of the largest accounts in their organization. Arrive is one of Entec's most agile and responsive truckload carriers. Finally, Mike Coots is the Associate Vice President of Sales and Marketing, one of the nation's largest plastics warehousing and trucking partners, Plastic Express. Based out of the nation's plastics hub, Houston, Texas, Mike has been with Plastic Express for nearly a decade and has spent the majority of his professional career in the plastics industry. A little bit about Entec. Founded in 1985, Entec Polymers has steadily built the deepest line card and sales and technical team in the industry, offering a full slate of highly engineered and specialty resins, as well as a full slate of commodities. Entec has the technical and commercial resources to help you find the most suitable product for your application and at the right price. And we've got a time-tested supply chain network to get your material to you in a reliable manner. Ravago is the parent company of Entec Polymers, with a total of over 14 billion pounds of resin sold annually. The Ravago Group represents the largest distributor of plastic resins in the world, but we're proudest of our broad customer base and the complementary relationships that we have with our many suppliers. To support Entec and its affiliates within the Ravago Group, we've had to become extremely proficient in end-to-end supply chain management. We've done so by developing true partnerships with trucking and warehouse service providers. And as one of the largest importers and exporters in the world, we've got excellent relationships with our ocean carriers. As you'll see in the upcoming slides, the extreme challenges that we're all faced with in today's environment make those relationships all the more important. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Alex Barrett, who's going to provide you with an update on the ocean freight market and how it's affecting our ability to get product to our customers timely and cost effectively. Alex?
Thank you, Sean. Good afternoon, everyone. It's definitely been a remarkable year in global maritime shipping. I'm sure we've all heard the term unprecedented way too many times when it comes to our supply chain challenges, more than we'd like to admit. For the majority of this discussion, we're really looking at the disruption of the maritime market from Asia, but this has obviously had a far-reaching impact on logistics around the world. So from introducing blank sailings to tremendous port congestion at transshipment ports, the supply challenge changed the face of global shipping over the last year. There simply just wasn't enough volume on traditionally steady trades like US exports and European exports. And for a considerable amount of time, the focus of world trade was squarely upon Chinese exports. And during this time, we've seen some remarkable things like, carriers not accepting bookings on US exports to Asia because they simply wanted to ship empties back for a quick turnaround for Asian exports. So we saw record ocean freight increases over the last year, rates up 340% year over year and up 208% in the last quarter alone. And these increases are still coming. First half of July is already seeing general rate increases of another $2,000 to $3,000. And the structure of these rates has also changed. So in the past, the BCO, the beneficial cargo owner business, made up around 45% of the yearly contracted volume with a shipping line. The freight forwarding market, the MVOCC market, accounted for roughly another 45% of that contracted volume, with the last 10% intentionally left available for the spot market. Well, now shipping lines have forced the forwarding market to operate strictly on the spot market with 14-day contracts. So the demand for equipment and allocation has allowed carriers to dictate this condition for many, many months now. And bookings obviously have to be made up to 3 to 4 weeks in advance to reserve capacity. So this is making a tremendous challenge to secure equipment and space. And even at rate premiums, which are a relatively new phenomenon in the maritime world, they're upwards of additional $1,000 to $5,000 and still don't guarantee space in many of these situations. So the question becomes, where is this coming from? So as I mentioned before, coming out of COVID protocols, China was able to revitalize manufacturing much faster than the rest of the world, as much of us are now sitting at home buying more on Amazon than ever before. The changes in consumer demand, with more income allocated to consumer goods versus the ability to spend on services, drove needs for much more supply, and at the time, China was the only one providing that need. So this led to a major equipment imbalance as most of the world was shut down and Asia was booming. So extra vessels were brought back into service that had been put out on commission at the beginning of the pandemic, and this is adding to a situation where labor at US ports due to COVID protocols was extremely thin and subject to closures and shutdowns should an infection break out. It was not unusual for us to see 30 plus vessels waiting idly for over 2 weeks, and that became the norm in ports like Los Angeles and Oakland. Once the realization happened that consumer good demand pressure was at an all-time high, the big box chains like Walmart, Home Depot, Amazon started signing these exclusivity deals with ocean carriers very early in the contract period to ensure allocation and guarantee equipment reserves. So this had a trickle-down effect on the rest of the market, and everyone else is fighting for the remaining vessel capacity in an already saturated environment. And you can see here where we've included a headline from CNBC, and you may have already seen this, where Home Depot is chartering container vessels to move their excess volume. So keep in mind, this is on top of the exclusivity deals they've already signed with shipping lines. The charter vessel is 100% Home Depot cargo. And just to give you an idea, charter costs have risen from $14,000 a day in Q3 2020 to over $150,000 per day today. So after all this doom and gloom, how can we help? At Ravago, we're bringing on dedicated personnel to monitor and secure capacity and pricing on a daily basis, especially in the Asia to US market. So we continue to leverage our global footprint to negotiate long-term yearly contracts for the majority of our lanes. And globally, we have secured close to 100,000 TEUs of capacity through our yearly global tender. We've also a team that tracks and reports all container and vessel activity for our US imports. So as an importer or purchaser, there are strategies you can implement to alleviate some of these pain points. So it's important for us to remain as nimble and flexible as possible. So for example, forecasting. The farther you can forecast, the better. Carriers love them. If you have steady business, that's obviously preferred by the carriers, but if you don't, giving them as much lead time as possible will definitely help. It's important to build in redundancies, and that's where we can come in. That's where we can help. Making sure we have multiple carrier options and multiple alliance gives you options. Also, sourcing from multiple regions is an important factor. We saw that everyone sourcing material from the same region, obviously, in 2020 was such a challenge. And the lesson we can take in a post-pandemic world is flexible sourcing locations. We need to be planning for increased transit times in this current environment. We need to set expectations with our customers while carrying higher inventory if possible. There's also a storage in transit program that some carriers are offering now. This is a program that will hold containers at strategic transshipment ports for up to 21 days. For example, to get your cargo out of Asia, and then you can distribute your product around the world from that transshipment port. So this may be an option that would help you. We also for sure have been planning for higher costs. So can you afford the premium services that we mentioned? If not, how long can you afford to wait to get on the next available vessel? And we need to be taking advantage of certain spot opportunities that have and will continue to arise. This is why our dedicated personnel is checking these every single day. Slugs of capacity have been opening up, and we've been able to quickly act and take advantage of them when we can. And obviously, don't always plan on lowest costs and quote. As we've seen in this market, the lowest rate often doesn't get you on board. What we're looking for is the best rate, which is one that's competitive and gets you equipment and space. These are definitely trying times, but we know in global shipping, it will not last forever. We may be in this market for the foreseeable future, but it's vital to build those key relationships that will outlast the turbulence of these current conditions. So thank you so much for your time. I know how valuable it is, and I hope I was able to add some value to your business. I'm now going to pass it over to my colleague, Jay Pickett.
Thank you very much, Alex. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Jay Pickett. Myself and an Orlando-based team that I'm very proud of are responsible for Entec's North American domestic logistics. Just to get things started, for those not familiar with the chart on the left, the Morgan Stanley Freight Index is one of the largest measures of the nation's trucking capacity. It is used as a gauge for how congested and backlogged our overall supply chain is operating. It's looking at a simple ratio of available or open shipments out in the market versus the number of trucks and drivers on the roadways. It's the key measure for this well-known metric. The light blue line and the red line, both are shaded in gray, represent January 2020 through 2021 year to date. We've highlighted the point where most of the world went on lockdown due to the pandemic, and the sudden rise in demand the nation experienced as consumer demand began to return afterwards. The stress that demand has put on the industry has taken the truckload ratio from less than one open order per truck on the road, meaning there's one truck and one driver available out there, to a current 6 to 7 open orders for every one truck on the road. May marked the second highest month for freight volume in the last 30 plus years, and June is right on its heels. As manufacturers, distributors, producers, whatever our positions may be, we likely pay attention to the articles and news regarding supply chain shortages. From obviously plastics, that's what got everyone to this webinar, to semiconductors, to essential goods. It's not just the raw goods or the finished products that are coming up short, but getting those items to where they need to be is becoming increasingly harder. I don't believe we've ever had a presidentially mandated task force on supply chain issues until we started crawling back from the pandemic. And now we're at a pivotal point in history. As silly as it may sound, because of everything happening in our world today, even employees at places like Chick-fil-A and Starbucks are finding themselves in the middle of issues they've never had to face before. Imagine this for a moment. The average teenage employee at Starbucks now not only knows more about the global economy and the global supply chain than the average consumer they're serving. Now imagine that the average Starbucks barista is having to explain to the average consumer why they can't serve them a mocha latte because their supply of whole beans is limited and they can't find a truck to get it to their location. Realize it or not, all of the dots in today's global supply chain do connect at one point or the other. The not rapid, but near immediate shift in buying patterns that the world saw due to the pandemic stressed everything we knew about supply chain. In many places, it even broke it. We've seen a growth in e-commerce and home deliveries in less than 12 months that wasn't forecasted to happen until the year 2025. All this added demand takes not just trucks to get things through the supply chain, it takes warehouses to hold and transfer it, people to pull it, stage it, move it, equipment to carry it. As the world gets more expensive to operate in, as wages grow, as real estate prices increase, unfortunately, it takes more capital to move things from the beginning to end, and it's going to continue to do so. Now, while most states have began to relax or even remove most of the pandemic protocols, and the world we all knew 18 months ago begins to slowly, or if you're in Florida, very rapidly, return to normalcy, it can be easy to forget about several things. Hundreds of thousands of workers are still without jobs, and we'd be foolish to think that everyone on this call isn't experiencing labor issues. For dozens of reasons, there's still a shortage of the main component to supporting our rebound in demand, and that's people. From truckers to dock workers to line workers to executives to supervisors to cooks to dishwashers, the return to employment hasn't happened anywhere close to the return in demand has. There's also still global travel restrictions, varying protocols, lack of air traffic to move shipments. As we heard earlier from Alex, there's a huge imbalance in ocean freight. Everything is congested. We all heard about the cargo ship stuck in the Suez Canal. We made memes, we blew up the internet about it, but that held up nearly a third of the global supply chain. People, equipment, and capacity are still being utilized to pick up the backlog. From the port to your docks, everything is still trying to catch up, and we're all struggling to do so. But probably the most important aspect that might be missed is, while here in the US, we're at a vaccination rate of somewhere around 60%, the rest of the globe is still struggling and far behind that. Many are struggling very hard. One of my wife's closest friends is an emergency room doctor in Honduras, and she just recently got her first vaccination shot as an emergency room doctor. We are still in a global fight with the pandemic, and carriers across the globe are still tethered to vaccine distribution, and they will be until the entire globe has gotten through this. So how are we at Entec and our supply partners shifting our strategies, our positions, basically our everything to try and ensure we're supporting the rest of our partners? There's obviously no silver bullet. I think everybody knows that. I think everybody's aware of it. But we've been chipping away at several things, trying to make as big of a difference as we can. Large companies like FedEx are industry leaders in technology, but by and large, there's a huge gap between the data capabilities of trucking companies and the information that is being craved by shippers and receivers. We've integrated with the industry leader, Project 44, to provide us with more real-time tracking information, freight visibility, and predictive analytics for everything moving in our network. We're still beta testing several aspects of it, but the ability to see near everything down to a street level, provide real-time ETAs, and be proactive instead of reactive is just around the corner. We're currently in the network modeling stage of implementing dedicated fleets in several of our key market areas. Placing these fleets, these dedicated full-time drivers, full-time power units, trailers, even fleet managers in these areas will allow us to near flawlessly service our partners in these local markets, allowing you to know the drivers that regularly visit your facilities, allowing them to understand your operations and service you better, and allowing us to react better and collaborate more with confidence to your demand needs is going to be a huge improvement on our market conditions. We're not only implementing new warehouse management software and evaluating a new ERP system, which will allow our own internal processes to become more fluid, touchless, and faster to process from end to end. We're also evaluating our warehouse network to find efficiencies that will allow us to better place our material, to get it to you faster, and ideally expand our dedicated fleet initiative to significantly reduce the struggles on labor, trucking, and everything in between. At this point, we're going to hear how some of our largest partners across several modes of transportation are positioning themselves to help the industry, as well as Entec, climb out of the struggles we're all experiencing. Everybody knows FedEx, handling nearly 40,000 LTL shipments annually for us alone, as well as being the world's largest LTL provider. It's clear they are key to our operations. So first up is Andy Greer, our worldwide account manager at FedEx.
Hey, thank you, Jay, and thank you to your entire team for putting this webinar together today and giving us a platform to speak to what has definitely been an extraordinary time for FedEx. The last year and a half, we've all been presented with challenges and opportunities that are ongoing, dynamic, and probably going to continue for at least the near future. I've always thought of FedEx as an extension of our partners like Ravago that we do business with, and we want that and to be perceived as a value add, and to maintain that perception during these tough times continues to be our goal. So obviously the pandemic and the subsequent protocols that we've all heard about repeatedly are the root cause of many of the challenges we're facing today. And while we cannot control the skyrocketing consumer demand, I'd like to emphasize the human aspect as it relates to FedEx and the environment we're operating in, specifically employees and driver shortages. As I just mentioned, I like to think of us as an extension of the businesses that we partner with, and that's a double-edged sword. We are also then an extension of their problems and their COVID outbreaks. So, when companies have social distancing issues or quarantines or subsequent closing and reopenings with little or no notice, that especially impacts the transportation industry, where the human element is necessary basically at every step of the way right now. Companies need employees to show up to work to produce their products. Humans are needed to load trucks, drive trucks, and deliver products. And most of the time there needs to be a healthy human on the other end to receive products. And if at any point during that process, one of those basic interactions doesn't take place, then you have the foundation of where we are now, with limited capacity and in turn slower transit times, backlogs, embargoes, and even policy changes. For example, shipment size restrictions that have been implemented by many LTL carriers recently. So additionally, while we focus on the inconsistent supply of healthy employees in our networks, we also are greatly affected by the one-off contributing factors that occur, like, we're coming off one of the worst winter storms in recent history this February that basically shut down the country for a couple of weeks. There are localized scenarios that may prevent us from servicing certain geographic areas. And even the impact of stimulus checks for COVID relief. That, according to many sources, has also attributed to the shrinking candidate pool of potential new hires for us. And, so although these can seem like isolated issues, the best analogy that I read recently to describe the situation is that we've all been thrown into a game of whack-a-mole. I don't know if you remember the old game of whack-a-mole. We're uncertain as to where or when the next obstacle will pop up. So when you take all of these elements into consideration, it is amazing to consider what we have been able to achieve during this period. We've had about an average of 570,000 employees and contractors show up to work on a daily basis. We have a daily package volume of over 18 million. We're delivering over 100,000 freight shipments daily. Any given night, we're flying 682 aircraft around the world, servicing 650 airports globally. And we've managed to maintain and keep a fleet of over 200,000 vehicles on the road. And most importantly, throughout all this, we have placed a real major emphasis on the distribution of vaccines and other critical items throughout the fight against COVID-19. Now, I know somebody listening right now may be saying to themselves, you know, how does this help me with my current shipment that's been stuck in the FedEx network for 3 days? And to address those concerns, we can look at the slide currently in front of us. I mean, it illustrates that FedEx is definitely not waiting on our heels for these threats to resolve themselves. We're controlling what we can control. That is workforce expansion and network optimization. I mean, some of the figures on that slide are astounding. So my point in saying all this, and I think you touched on this a moment ago, specifically FedEx Freight, we are an industry leader. From a market share standpoint and resource standpoint in the LTL world, there really isn't a close second. And we are no more immune to this array of problems than any other carriers, regardless of size. There really isn't an industry or carrier that is immune to all these problems that we've discussed at length. I think the light at the end of the tunnel is probably directly tied to the time frame that normalcy in the workplace, in the workforce returns. And like I said before, unfortunately at FedEx, we can't control the demand side of this issue, but what we can continue to do is focus on what has made our brand what it is. And that's our amazing people and our culture. So that's where our focus is. And again, I'd like to thank you for the time today, and I'll hand it back over to you.
Thank you so much, Andy, for not just your insight, but your partnership. Our partnership with Austin, Texas-based Arrive Logistics spans back as far as my tenure with the company. Through steady growth, continual collaboration, and a unique approach to full truckload freight, our partnership has continued to thrive, and they now handle around 20% of our annual truckload moves. Matt Johnson, their Director of Business Development, is here to give you their insight and approach. Take it away, Matt.
Thank you, Jay. I would like to thank Ravago and Entec for having me on today's webinar. My name is Matt Johnson, and I am the Director of Business Development at Arrive Logistics. I help oversee our sales strategy and operating efficiencies for some of our top shippers at our company. When Entec asked me to participate on this webinar, they asked me to speak about how Arrive can help shippers and receivers navigate through today's current market conditions and what immediate solutions we can provide. With rates at an all-time high and capacity and equipment scarce, Arrive has gone out and raised capital, increase our headcount, and improve our technology. In the short term, the immediate solutions we recommend for our partners, shippers, and receivers is to strive to be a shipper or receiver of choice. What I mean by that is treat your carriers and drivers coming into your facilities like customers and partners. It is crucial that you do this because if you are flagged as an unfavorable facility to go into, word travels fast. Drivers have smartphones. They're not afraid to post reviews on Google or even browse the internet to find reviews about your facility. Some other ways to stand out are improve driver amenities, pay carriers quickly and accurately, offer drop and hook options, and offer more favorable shipping and receiving hours. Lastly, I think this is very important that most shippers and receivers don't think about is strive to limit detention and dwell time at your facilities. If you're holding drivers for a long time, this eats into their drive time hours, which ultimately creates less capacity on the roads. Another immediate solution Arrive has done this year is advance our technology. We launched our carrier portal called Carrier Edge. This is where carriers can log in and place offers or book loads without having to pick up the phone or email an employee at Arrive. This is making the process to book shipments more efficient. Another way our technology has helped our strategic partners out is that we have the API capabilities to place automated rates. This simple process allows Arrive to provide instant rates, rate feedback, and adjust if we need to. We back 100% of those rates we submit. Also, we have revamped our employee compensation plan around performance. We offer bonuses to our staff if they hit KPI scores that are modeled around our client scorecards. To help with inflated rates, Arrive is offering strategic partners cost plus or rebate programs to help our partners sustain the elevated rates in the current market conditions. Lastly, Arrive has gone out and partnered with 4PLs and core carriers in our network to rent and utilize their unused equipment and offer that equipment to our strategic partners. Now I'd like to pass it back to Jay.
Really appreciate your time, Matt. It's interesting to see how much some of the little things like unloading times can play such a huge factor in the way things move. Thanks for all you do for us. Lastly, and certainly not least, one of the industry's largest warehousing and dry bulk providers in the nation, Plastic Express, has been partnering with Entec for several decades. From their humble roots in Southern California to now being an industry staple, Plastic Express handles nearly a third of Entec's bulk freight. Mike Coots, their AVP of Sales and Marketing, is here to give us their take. Have at it, Mike.
Thank you, Jay, and good afternoon, everyone. Like the others, I want to thank Ravago for allowing us to be here to spin our side of what's going on in the marketplace. And I think it's great that we've had each of these various components of the supply chain represented. I oversee our sales strategy for many of our largest producer and distribution partners, of which Ravago is right at the top of the list. This bullet point sheet that we have here, I just want to point out, I'm leading with talking about our drivers having the need to make them the highest paid drivers in the driver pool out there. And why would I start with that? Prior to deregulation in 1980, bulk truck drivers were the king of the hill in terms of truck driver jobs, in that a bulk truck driver is different than other truck drivers to the extent that you have guys and girls that have to pressurize vessels, they have to pull hoses, they have to climb ladders, they have to be out in the rain, sleet, and snow. And not to minimize any other form of trucking, but they're not just bumping a dock, so to speak. They're doing a lot of extra activities, as well as making sure that bulk material is coming out of a rail car, for example, going into a bulk truck, and then being redistributed into someone's silo at their plant without contaminating it, without putting dirt in it, without getting water in it, all those sorts of things. That bulk truck driver today, in today's world, has made the same money that a driver for anyone else is making. And that needs to change. Just anecdotally, for those of you around the country, we are located pretty much everywhere in the country now, but largely around the Sun Belt, as that's where the population has been and where the consumption growth has been through decades. We are perpetually advertising for drivers, and we are seeing driver wages in six figures now. And when we advertise at those types of levels, we're not even getting a sniff. So there's definitely something going on there. The supply and demand part of it, we've lost a lot of drivers, as everyone knows, the whole industry has. They're not coming back, and we've got to get their attention. So I wanted to emphasize that first one. We've got to make these drivers feel like they're needed, because they are. It moves our entire society. So I put a lot of emphasis on that point. And someone earlier spoke to how we need to be treating these drivers. One of the things through my long career now is that drivers have been, said to stay in your truck, we'll get to you when we get to you, and are forgotten about. We plead with you to make them I don't know if special is the right word, but make them important. They have to make a living. We have to help them to make that living. And if they're sitting for hours waiting, that's not productive for any of us, which I'll get to another point on that later. What are we trying to do? We're continually adding new equipment right now, both in tractors and bulk trailers across our network. The problem with that is all of our competitors are doing the same thing. with this new domestic supply chain that has evolved as a result of COVID. There's been a lot of reshoring that has occurred. A lot of new business has come up that you all know much better than I do. But everything from, medical grade equipment, bags, more food type applications, whether it's milk bottles or Coke bottles or water bottles or what have you, because of so much, so many people staying at home. All these things have contributed to an unbelievable growth across the domestic sector for bulk trucking, and none of us together have been able to keep up. That said, what was taking us 6 months to get a tractor or trailer is now taking us a year. So just double the lead time, and in coming out of something that nobody knew what was going to happen, whether it was going to last 30 days or 6 months or 3 years. We had to start making those adjustments on the fly to understand that we got to get in line and make sure that we're keeping up. So I just wanted everyone to understand that our turnaround time on new equipment is about a year now. It's a tough market out there. We're adding new locations for the export business, as most everyone I'm sure here knows. There has been a huge increase in production plants, expansions, new plants coming on, and there's still another wave that's coming now. When this market starts to turn around and settle down, there's going to be a huge need for export. So many of us in the market, and it's not what the emphasis is here today, but many of us in the market are positioned in locations like Savannah, Georgia, or Houston, Texas, with big warehousing compounds as well as packaging capability to meet those export demands. But along with that, part and parcel to it is the need for drayage capacity, as well as LTL and the like in those types of locations. So we have been steadily increasing our position in those key markets to cover those imminent needs. So this domestic market that I spoke of, COVID has really, really blown this thing up, and we are working with partners like Ravago to do dedicated models in certain locations, to bring in all new assets to a market that may not have had those assets prior to that. So we're working closely with our customer partners to help put ourselves in position to meet those growing demands that you are giving them in terms of consumption growth. And of course, as we have exploded, we've had something on the order of 15 to 17% year-over-year growth for the last 10 years at Plastic Express. It's been almost a vertical sort of thing, and with that growth, we've obviously had to add new staff, and that's everything from clerical all the way to executive level staff in order to support that growth. As far as EDI, we're working with our customer partners like the Ravagos to become as EDI savvy as we can to connect with our customers, to take some of the human error potential out of it, as well as speed of transaction. We want to get things turned around so that you can get paid, so that we can get paid, and move on to the next day. And lastly, and I can't emphasize this enough, and we ask that all of you that are listening share with Ravago so they can share with us. If there are things that we need to talk about, let's talk about them. Our sort of motto is that we want to over communicate, and we do that at every level of the organization, all the way up to the top level. So with that said, I want to thank you guys again for allowing me to be a part of this, and we'll be happy to answer any questions as we go forward from here. So I'll turn it back over to you guys.
Thank you so much, Mike, and everyone for all of the time and prep work that went in, not just today, but helping Entec become a trusted supplier in the market. It's clear in order to keep everything in the nation's supply chain humming along, everyone has their work cut out for them. But what does the future look like? What else can we do? How can everyone in it position themselves to have as few issues as possible? I'm going to hand this back over to our Vice President of Operations, Sean Williams, to share some final outlooks, start to tackle some of the questions that have been rolling in. Take it away, Sean.
Thanks, Jay. And thanks, Andrew, Mike, and Matt. We really appreciate your time and those insights. So what are some takeaways? It's perhaps one of the most overused terms in recent years, but there really is something about the so-called Amazon effect. There's no doubt that Amazon has revolutionized our experience as consumers, with just a few examples of similar online retailers that we've listed on this slide. And we're seeing less and less daylight between what's become customary from online retailers and what's expected of distributors of plastic resins like us. That being said, there are some inherent differences between the small parcels that the Amazons and Drizzlies of the world ship and Gaylord boxes, full bulk trucks, and even rail cars of plastic resins. Between working capital requirements to hold inventory and frequent pricing volatility, it's not always practical to have inventory within an hour's drive from all of our customers' manufacturing plants. To compound matters, the surge in demand for online retail, many truck drivers have flocked to this industry as it allows them to sleep in their own beds at night. All this puts pressure on the last leg of the relay race, logistics. And yet, in spite of all these forces working against us, we genuinely believe that Entec Polymers is well positioned to perform better than our peers in resin distribution. We do so by taking advantage of the strong relationships we've built with freight carriers like FedEx, Arrive, and Plastic Express, and by further utilizing our dedicated fleet of trucks with Ryder Logistics in certain markets, along with our strong warehouse partnerships. We're also committed to deeper collaboration with our customers, especially when supply is as tight as it is today. At this point, I'd like to move on to our Q&A segment. We've had a few questions surface, and I'll read them off, kind of in the order that I received them, and I'll direct them to the person that I think is most appropriate to answer. First question is, which ERP system are you implementing? I believe Jay alluded to that earlier. So Ravago has a suite of products. Some we would consider to be best-in-class third-party packages, which will relate to one of the other questions that's up here. But Ravago has developed its own proprietary software. It's been a product that's been developed over 20 plus years now that really is focused on plastics and chemicals. And we plan to extend the reach of that ERP. It's not a traditional ERP because it is homegrown, but it serves as a primary database to plug into other peripheral products, whether it be our transportation management system, which correlates to one of the other questions, credit management system, financial systems, et cetera. Our ERP system is really a expedient order handling system, and it's something that we continue to invest in heavily year by year. Next question. You can see that we've answered some in the chat. Besides paying more to secure truck capacity, what else can we do to ensure our freight moves in a timely manner? I think I'd like to aim that question towards Mike Coots.
Well, for starters, folks, with limitations in capacity, what are the immediate things that we can do to help? As much lead time as possible, obviously. No, that doesn't always work that way, but as much lead time as you can give us to allow us to be prepared to work your loads into our dispatch. Beyond that, the things that we don't necessarily always think of. Through history, generally, a customer service representative will take an order for a truckload, and their recipe card for that customer set up to deliver at 8 a.m. tomorrow. If we can get afternoon deliveries, if we can get nighttime deliveries, if we can get weekend deliveries, we can effectively double up capacity in terms of equipment. Not necessarily drivers, but with equipment, because we're turning that truck and he's making morning deliveries and he's making we'll call it after hours deliveries. So anything that you can do in that manner to help us, to give us other than the standard 8 a.m. to noon delivery window is hugely effective in helping us to maximize the utilization on that equipment.
Thanks, Mike. Next question is, which I believe Jay attempted to answer in the chat, but I'm not sure everybody's following that. So I will ask the question and add some color. Which transportation management software does Entec use? So Jay alluded to in his previous slide that we use Oracle Transportation Management. We've had this tool in our midst for 10 years now. It is constantly evolving, and most recently with the addition of the Project 44 tool that we plug into OTM. Project 44 has software that plugs into the vast majority of truckload and less than truckload carriers out in the U.S. market over the road freight. And that allows us to track our freight in quasi real time, and also they offer tools that provide predictive analytics when, for example, a truck is broken down on the side of the road, or if there's heavy traffic or flat tire, those kind of things, so that we can be proactive in terms of communicating with our customers. That's something that has been lacking up until very recently. So we're really excited about having that functionality so that we can be more communicative with our internal personnel, but also more importantly, our customers. So those of you that are interested in that kind of technology, certainly we look forward to sharing that, and to the point where you may be able to even follow your freight via a link. Next question. We hear a lot about driver shortages. What is the outlook for drivers in the industry? What other struggles are facing the industry in the next 12 to 24 months? I think I'll aim that at FedEx, please. Andy?
Hey, thank you. As far as the outlook for the driver shortage, I mean, a lot of the points that have already been made just continue to, we don't really see a light at the end of the tunnel for those. However, you know, compensation is obviously an obvious one that we've mentioned so far. We could all improve compensation, make the position of a driver more attractive, like it used to be. You know, one thing that's also not mentioned often, but there are a few more barriers to becoming a driver than some other professions that a young person might pursue. You know, for one, you have to be 21 years old, for example. So if a 19 or 20-year-old is trying to decide what he wants to do with his life, you know, becoming a driver may not even be an option at that point. So there's some intangibles like that aren't discussed a lot, but I think the recurring theme is we need to figure out how to make the position more attractive, whether that is through compensation, you know, retention programs, bonuses, etc.
I would agree, Andy. Probably safe to say that that's only going to cost more to entice people to move to an industry that's become more and more difficult. On that front, I'll ask one of my own questions. What's your take on the future of autonomous trucks?
This is a discussion we've been having for years, ever since the rumor of the drone deliveries, you know, taking place years ago. People are always fascinated by the autonomous delivery potential. I think that in theory they sound great, and even in isolated tests that have been performed, they do show some promise, but I think there's still a gap between the concept of the autonomous vehicle delivery and the widespread practical implementation.
I would agree, and as somebody that's married to a lawyer, I can attest that whenever there's an incident with a Tesla driverless car or an autonomous truck, our litigious society takes over pretty quickly. And so even though the technology is likely to continue to be very accomplished, I have a sinking suspicion it's going to take a couple of decades for it to become more mainstream. As a society, we're very, very risk averse, and you can imagine the risk coming with trucks that have no drivers in them. So I'm fascinated by it, but I don't think it's going to be our silver bullet anytime soon. Next question, has there been an increase in damaged shipments that you've seen due to the rush factor on orders? I think I'll also aim that one at Andy, not picking on you, but your orders tend to be more on the rush side than the other guys.
You know, as a percentage, we have not seen an uptick in damages. However, the challenges that we're going through right now are so multi-dimensional. You know, just for example, if we need employees and we're hiring, you know, a lot of employees to meet the demand in our network, obviously we have new employees. Do we have a relatively fresh forklift driver? Well, that's probably not outside the realm of possibility. But, you know, like I said, as a percentage, we have not seen an uptick in damages. But I'm sure if we looked at raw numbers, yes, we probably have.
Okay. Next question, and then I'm going to quit picking on you, Andy, but these are not surprisingly, our LTL freight tends to be the most time sensitive of all of our modes. So I'm not surprised to see some of the questions here because we share these concerns. The next one is, why are LTL companies across the board decreasing the size of their allowable shipments? And will this ever change and increase skid counts back to what we're used to?
I think it will change. I mean, obviously, when a network like ours is at capacity or almost at capacity, when capacity is limited, the more, obviously, the ideal shipment is a nice, perfectly, you know, perfect skid profile freight, as we call it. Anything that varies from that is, you know, I gave a customer an example the other day, and hopefully you guys will know what I'm talking about, but there's an old I Love Lucy from the show 40 years ago, and Lucy was working at a chocolate factory, and the little chocolates were coming down a conveyor belt. She was putting them in boxes, but every time one was turned sideways, there was a slight, you know, one of them needed any more attention than the other one. She would set it aside, and then, you know, she started putting those in her pockets, and then she was holding them in her hands. And before she knew it, she had little pieces of chocolate everywhere that needed individual attention. So I think the more profile freight that LTL carriers can have, that they can move with, you know, like I said, less individual attention. They fit perfectly in our network. Obviously, the better it is, not only for us, but in turn for our customers. So hopefully you stayed with me on that.
All right. Thanks, Andy. Appreciate that. Just a couple more questions. I want to be mindful of the time. Why are there so few carrier partners participating in bulk trucking? Mike Coots, throw that over the fence to you.
Sure. I think that's a great question. We have seen a huge consolidation in the industry over the last 10 years. Larger partners buying up smaller partners in the industry. I think some of the things we've discussed before are a big part of that. It's hard. I know I sound like a broken record, but it's hard to attract drivers who want to do all of that heavy lifting, so to speak, that is required in the bulk industry. So that's one component. The other component is you have a tractor and a trailer with a combined value when it comes off the line at roughly $300,000. So it's an expensive it's an expensive thing for relatively little return on investment. When you can drive a van and create the same type of revenue dollars in general terms. So there's less and less people making a go of it in the industry because of those types of factors, and it's largely cost related. The return on investment is simply not what it once was. Because most of the people on here have done a really good job through the years, myself included. When I was on the shipper side of it, we've done a really good job of negotiating freight rates that were basically commensurate or very close to those of van type freight rates, and the investment in the equipment doesn't allow for that. So there's been consolidation. The smaller guys have largely, been bought up or gone away because of those sort of inverted economics.
Thanks, Mike. I'll add a little plug for Entec and Ravago. You may have caught on one of our earlier slides that we have a small fleet of about 400 rail cars that we've purchased over the years to help take some pressure off of customers that oftentimes feel the challenges of producer rail cars, hitting demurrage levels early on, 30, 45 days, et cetera. So consider that an alternative for you if you've got bulk capability in silos whereby we could transload producer product into our rail cars and offer more forgiving rail car dwell times than most would. So I'd like to get that out there. I think we're virtually out of time, so I'm going to close with just a couple comments and then we'll wrap it up for the day. I'd like to close today by soliciting your help. What can we do to help each other enjoy a higher degree of success? And how can we become, as Matt Johnson called it earlier, a shipper of choice? On behalf of the entire Entec team, we'd like to thank everyone for joining us for today's webinar, and we encourage you to work directly with Entec's sales team. We're prepared to work with you to develop creative strategies in order to maintain a reliable supply chain. Thanks again, and we look forward to serving you.